Montana Territory, 1875. Dust spiraled in the wake of the departing wagon train, mingling with the bitter smoke of dying campfires. The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned campsite, illuminating the lone figure of a young woman standing amid scattered belongings, her blue gingham dress billowing in the autumn wind. 22-year-old Lillian Summers watched the last wagon disappear over the ridge, the weight of abandonment settling heavy on her shoulders. Daniel Yates rode his chestnut gelding toward the remnants of the camp, a strange sight catching his eye. At 25, he'd seen much of the harshness the frontier could offer: hostile weather, dangerous men, unforgiving land, but the sight of a woman alone in this territory was something new altogether. "Ma'am," he called, tipping back his worn brown hat to reveal sandy blonde hair and a face weathered just enough to show he'd earned his living under the Montana sky. His clean-shaven jaw tensed as he approached. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" Lillian turned, revealing striking green eyes rimmed red from crying. Her golden blonde hair partially escaped from its pins. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered a shawl around her shoulders. "They've gone," she said simply, gesturing toward the horizon. "The Haversons claimed I was bringing fever to the train. When Jacob, my brother, took ill last night, they made us stay behind." Her voice broke. "He didn't survive till morning. I just buried him." Daniel dismounted, noticing for the first time the fresh mound of earth beneath a cottonwood tree. Something twisted in his chest, a feeling he'd long tried to bury as deeply as that grave. Caring for others only led to pain out here. The West was no place for sentiment. It demanded only strength and self-reliance. Those who survived were those who stayed detached. "I am sorry for your loss, ma'am," he said, maintaining a cautious distance, "but you cannot stay here. There's Blackfoot territory to the north, and this valley draws predators come nightfall." "I have nowhere to go," Lillian said, her chin lifting with a pride that impressed him despite himself. "My parents died in Kansas of the same fever. Jacob and I sold everything to join the wagon train to Oregon." She gestured to her meager possessions. "This is all I have left in the world." Daniel looked away, uncomfortable with the weight of her gaze. His ranch lay 3 hours' ride southwest, a modest spread he'd built alone, just as he preferred his life. Alone was safe. Alone meant no one to disappoint you, no one to leave you, no one to bury. "There's a settlement called Silverdale 2 days' ride west," he said finally. "I can escort you there. They'll have work for a young woman, perhaps at the boarding house." "And if I refuse your charity, Mr. Yates, Daniel Yates?" "And it isn't charity, ma'am. No decent man would leave a woman alone out here." He gestured toward the distant mountains. "Those clouds mean snow by nightfall. You'd not survive till morning." Lillian looked down at her brother's grave, then back at Daniel, measuring him with those clear green eyes. "Very well, Mr. Yates, I accept your escort to Silverdale." As Daniel helped her gather her few belongings, he kept reminding himself of the truth he'd learned 6 years ago when he'd watched outlaws murder his family. Attachment was weakness, and weakness got you killed in the West. He would see Miss Summers safely to Silverdale, and then return to his solitary life, unburdened by the complications of human connection. He could not have known that the approaching snowstorm would make a mockery of his careful plans. The snow began falling earlier than Daniel had predicted, thick white flakes that quickly obscured the trail. By mid-afternoon, visibility had diminished to mere yards, and the temperature plummeted as the wind picked up. "We need to make camp," Daniel shouted over the howling wind, pulling his horse alongside Lillian, who rode side-saddle on a dappled mare he'd had as a packhorse. "There's a sheltered hollow ahead with a stand of pines. We'll weather the storm there." Lillian nodded, her face pale with cold beneath the woolen scarf she'd wrapped around her head. He'd noticed she hadn't complained once during the grueling ride, despite the fact that her dress and thin coat were wholly inadequate for Montana weather. Under the pines, the snowfall was lighter, and Daniel worked quickly to establish a camp, building a lean-to against a natural rock formation and starting a fire in its shelter. When he'd unsaddled the horses and tethered them in a protected spot, he turned to find Lillian attempting to help, her fingers nearly blue with cold as she arranged branches. "Your hands," he said, more gruffly than intended. "You'll get frostbite." "I will not be useless, Mr. Yates," she replied, though her teeth chattered. Daniel sighed, retrieving a pair of leather gloves from his saddlebag. "Here, and you can call me Daniel. Formalities seem rather pointless when we're sharing a lean-to in a blizzard." A ghost of a smile touched her lips as she accepted the gloves. Then you must call me Lillian. As darkness fell, they huddled near the fire, the snow creating a natural wall around their shelter. Daniel prepared a simple meal of jerky, beans, and coffee, watching as color gradually returned to Lillian's cheeks. You mentioned a ranch, she said after a long silence. Is it a large operation? No, just enough for one man. 50 head of cattle, 2 horses besides these, and a cabin I built myself. He poured more coffee into her tin cup. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. That sounds like paradise after 2 months on the trail. She stared into the flames. Jacob and I dreamed of our own place. After our parents died, the farm was sold to pay debts. We thought Oregon would give us a fresh start. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Her grief was too raw, too familiar. It reminded him of kneeling in the dust beside his mother's body, his father and younger sister already cold nearby, while hoofbeats faded in the distance. You should try to sleep, he said, changing the subject. We've got a hard ride tomorrow if the snow lets up. Lillian nodded, wrapping herself in the extra blanket he'd provided. She settled on her side, facing the fire, and Daniel found himself studying the delicate curve of her profile, the way the firelight caught in her golden hair. Thank you, she whispered, her eyes already closing. For not leaving me behind, too. Daniel said nothing, but sleep eluded him long after Lillian's breathing had deepened into slumber. Her presence disturbed the careful isolation he'd constructed around himself. He'd spent 6 years avoiding entanglements, focusing only on building his ranch and staying alive. Even in Silverdale, he maintained a polite distance from the townspeople, visiting only when necessary for supplies. Yet something about Lillian Summers challenged his certainty. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity with which she faced her losses, or the determination in her green eyes. Whatever it was, it left him uneasy, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Morning brought no relief from the snow. If anything, the blizzard had intensified overnight. Daniel emerged from the lean-to check on the horses, returning with frost clinging to his eyelashes and hat. We're not going anywhere today, he announced. Maybe not tomorrow either, from the look of it. Lillian sat up, her hair tumbling loose around her shoulders. What does that mean for us? It means we wait. Daniel busied himself rebuilding the fire. I've got provisions for 5 days if we're careful. The horses have enough shelter and can nibble bark if necessary. I'm sorry to be such a burden, Lillian said, pinning her hair back up with efficient movements. If you'd left me at the campsite. You'd be dead, Daniel interrupted flatly. And I wouldn't be able to live with that, so let's not pretend it was an option. His bluntness seemed to surprise her, but then she smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, warming her eyes and revealing a dimple in her right cheek. Then I suppose we're stuck with each other, Daniel Yates. The day passed slowly, confined as they were to the lean-to. They took turns telling stories to pass the time, Daniel speaking of his journey west from Pennsylvania, carefully avoiding any mention of his family's fate, Lillian recounting her childhood in Kansas, her father's wheat farm, her mother's garden. She grew the most beautiful roses, Lillian said, her expression softening with memory. Everyone said it was impossible in that climate, but she was stubborn, like you, she added with a teasing glance. Me, stubborn? Daniel feigned offense. I'm the most agreeable man in the territory. Says the man who lives alone with his cattle. Her laughter rang out, clear and unexpected, before her expression sobered. Why do you live alone, Daniel? Truly. The question hung between them, dangerous as a loaded gun. Daniel stared into the fire, debating how much to reveal. 6 years of solitude had left him unaccustomed to sharing his thoughts. Because it's safer, he finally said. Out here, people you care about become targets or burdens. Either way, they're liabilities. That's a lonely philosophy. Daniel shrugged. Lonely is better than dead. Lillian was quiet for a long moment. My mother used to say that a life without connection isn't really living at all, it's just surviving. Her words struck uncomfortably close to home. Wasn't that exactly what he'd been doing, surviving, not living? Building his ranch had given him purpose, but little joy. Each achievement, the finished cabin, the growing herd, the fenced pasture, had been hollow without anyone to share it. Your mother sounds like a wise woman, he conceded. She was. Lillian pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. I miss her every day, and now Jacob, her voice caught. Without thinking, Daniel reached across the small space between them and covered her hand with his. "I'm sorry, Lillian." For a brief moment, her fingers curled around his, warm and alive. The simple human contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, and he withdrew his hand as if burned. Lillian's eyes met his, questioning, but he turned away, making a show of checking their provisions. The blizzard raged for 3 days, trapping them in their makeshift shelter. By the third evening, Daniel found himself dreading their eventual arrival in Silverdale. The thought of returning to his empty cabin held none of its usual appeal. Somehow, Lillian had breached the careful walls he'd built around himself, slipping past his defenses with her quiet strength and unexpected moments of humor. On the morning of the 4th day, they awoke to silence. The wind had died overnight, and sunlight filtered through the pines, creating diamonds of light on the pristine snow. "It's beautiful," Lillian breathed, stepping out from the lean-to. Daniel watched her face as she took in the transformed landscape, her cheeks flushed with cold and wonder. Something twisted in his chest, a longing he'd thought long buried with his family. "We should be able to reach Silverdale by nightfall if we start now," he said, more gruffly than intended. Lillian turned to him, her expression falling slightly. "Of course. We've imposed on each other long enough." The ride to Silverdale was largely silent, both lost in their own thoughts as they navigated the snow-covered trail. The town appeared in the distance as the sun began to set, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys against the darkening sky. Daniel led them to the Silverdale boarding house, a 2-story structure with yellow curtains in the windows. Mrs. Peterson, the plump, middle-aged proprietor, answered his knock, her eyebrows rising at the sight of Lillian. "Daniel Yates, bringing a young lady to my door. Now I've seen everything," she declared. "Mrs. Peterson, this is Miss Lillian Summers. She was traveling with the Haverson wagon train when they left her behind after her brother passed. The blizzard delayed our journey." Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. "You poor dear, come in, come in. We'll get you warmed up and fed properly." Lillian turned to Daniel before entering. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," he said stiffly. "Mrs. Peterson will help you find work. She knows everyone in town." "Will you?" Lillian hesitated. "Will you come back to town soon?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably, aware of Mrs. Peterson's curious gaze. "I don't come to town much. Especially in winter." Disappointment flickered across Lillian's face. "I understand. Goodbye then, Daniel, and thank you again." He tipped his hat. "Good luck to you, Miss Summers." As he rode out of Silverdale, the setting sun at his back and the lights of the town receding behind him, Daniel told himself he was returning to the life he wanted. No complications, no attachments, no vulnerability. Then why, he wondered as his cabin came into view, did it suddenly feel so empty? 2 weeks passed, and Daniel threw himself into work with a vengeance. He repaired fences damaged in the blizzard, reinforced the barn roof, and spent long hours checking on his cattle. Physical exhaustion, he hoped, would drive away thoughts of green eyes and golden hair, of laughter around a campfire in the snow. It didn't work. Lillian's presence had awakened something in him, a hunger for connection he'd denied for 6 years. The silence of his cabin, once comfortable, now echoed with absence. He found himself talking aloud to his horses, just to hear a human voice. When his supplies ran low, he faced a decision he'd been avoiding. Silverdale was the closest settlement, the logical place to replenish his stores. He could ride the extra day to Whitefish, but that meant crossing the North Ridge, still treacherous with snow. "Damn it all," he muttered to his gelding as he saddled up. "We're going to Silverdale." The town was busier than usual when he arrived, wagons lining the main street. He'd forgotten it was the first Saturday of the month, market day, when outlying homesteaders came to trade and socialize. Daniel tied his horse outside the general store, steeling himself for the inevitable interactions. He was examining bags of coffee beans when a familiar voice reached him. "Daniel." He turned to find Lillian standing in the doorway, a basket over her arm. The sight of her knocked the breath from his lungs. She wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, her golden hair neatly arranged beneath a modest bonnet. The gauntness that had marked her face during their journey had softened, her cheeks now carrying a healthy glow. "Miss Summers," he managed, tipping his hat, "you look well." "As do you," she approached, a smile lighting her features. "Though perhaps a bit tired. Are you working too hard at that ranch of yours?" "There's always work to be done." He cleared his throat, searching for something else to say. 6 years of isolation had left his social skills woefully inadequate. Have you found employment in town? Yes, Mrs. Peterson hired me to help at the boarding house. I cook breakfasts and keep the rooms tidy. Her smile faltered slightly. It's not what I'd hoped for when we set out for Oregon, but I'm grateful for it. An awkward silence fell between them. Daniel shifted his weight, acutely aware of curious glances from other customers. I should let you get back to your shopping, Lillian finally said, disappointment evident in her voice. It was good to see you, Daniel. As she turned to leave, panic surged through him. He wasn't ready for their conversation to end. Would you, he blurted, then caught himself, lowering his voice. Would you allow me to buy you a cup of coffee? At the cafe, if you're not too busy, that is. The smile that bloomed across her face was worth every moment of discomfort. I'd like that very much. The Silverdale Cafe was crowded, but they found a small table near the window. Over steaming cups of coffee, their conversation flowed more easily than Daniel had expected. Lillian told him about life at the boarding house, about Mrs. Peterson's kindness and the regular boarders she'd come to know. And you, she asked, how is life at your ranch? Daniel hesitated. The honest answer, lonely beyond bearing since he'd left her in town, seemed too revealing. Quiet, he said instead. The cattle came through the blizzard better than I feared. I'm glad, Lillian studied him, her green eyes searching. I've thought about you, wondered if you were managing alone out there. I've always managed alone, he said, more defensively than intended. I know, she touched his hand briefly, the contact sending warmth up his arm. That's what worries me. Before Daniel could respond, a commotion at the door drew their attention. 3 men entered, trail-worn, unshaven, with the hard eyes and loose swagger that spoke of trouble. The cafe fell silent as they surveyed the room, hands resting too casually near their holstered pistols. Daniel tensed, recognition hitting him like a physical blow. The tallest man, dark-haired, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, had featured in his nightmares for 6 years, Vince Hollister. The outlaw who'd led the raid on his family's homestead, who'd shot his father in the back while he begged for his family's lives. Hollister hadn't seen him yet. Daniel pulled his hat lower, turning his face away. Blood pounded in his ears, drowning out Lillian's concerned questions. All the pain and rage he'd buried rushed back, the screams, the gunshots, his mother's lifeless eyes staring at the sky. Daniel, Lillian's voice penetrated his haze. You've gone white as a sheet. Do you know those men? We need to leave, he said, his voice strained. Now, through the back. Understanding the urgency in his tone, Lillian nodded, gathering her shawl. They slipped out the rear door into an alley, Daniel fighting the urge to look back, to confront the man who destroyed his family. But that would put Lillian in danger, and somehow, impossibly, her safety had become more important than his vengeance. Those men, he explained as they hurried toward the general store, are the Hollister gang. They're wanted in 3 territories. The tall one, his voice caught. He killed my family 6 years ago. Lillian's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Daniel, I'm so sorry. I need to get you back to the boarding house, then alert the sheriff. His mind raced ahead. If Hollister was in Silverdale, it meant trouble for the town. I'm coming with you, Lillian said firmly. Absolutely not. These men are dangerous. Which is precisely why you shouldn't face them alone. She gripped his arm, her eyes flashing. I've lost everyone I love, Daniel. I won't stand by while you put yourself in danger. Her words, everyone I love, hung between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Daniel stared at her, caught between frustration and a fierce, unexpected joy. Fine, he conceded. But you stay behind me when we talk to the sheriff. Sheriff Williams, a grizzled veteran of the frontier, listened grimly to Daniel's identification of the outlaws. Hollister, you're sure? I'll never forget his face, Daniel said flatly. He and his men killed my parents and sister near Fort Benton in '69, took everything of value and burned our cabin. The sheriff nodded, reaching for his rifle. I've had telegrams about them. Robbed a bank in Helena last month, killed 2 men. He glanced at Lillian. Miss Summers, you'd best get back to the boarding house, lock the doors and stay inside. With respect, Sheriff, she replied, I'd rather stay with Daniel. Suit yourself, but stay clear when the shooting starts. The sheriff checked his ammunition. I'll gather some deputies. You got a gun, Yates? Daniel nodded, his Colt revolver rode in its holster beneath his coat, a constant companion since that bloody day 6 years ago. Good. We'll need every hand. The sheriff headed for the door. They're likely at the saloon by now. We'll approach from different directions, try to take them by surprise. Outside, the market day crowd had thinned, word of the outlaw's presence spreading quickly. Daniel walked Lillian to the boarding house despite her protests. I won't have you in the line of fire, he insisted. Please, Lillian, I couldn't bear it if something happened to you. She searched his face, then nodded reluctantly. Be careful, Daniel, promise me. I promise. On impulse, he took her hand and pressed it briefly to his lips. I'll come back to you. The simple gesture seemed to affect her deeply. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she squeezed his hand. You'd better. As Daniel walked away, joining the sheriff and 4 hastily deputized townsmen, he realized with startling clarity that he had something to lose again. Someone to fight for beyond himself. The knowledge should have terrified him, hadn't he spent years avoiding precisely this vulnerability, but instead it steadied him, filled him with resolve. The Silverdale Saloon stood at the end of the main street, its batwing doors swinging as miners and cowboys entered and exited. Sheriff Williams positioned his men strategically, then nodded to Daniel. You and me through the front, he murmured. The others will cover the back and windows. Daniel checked his revolver one last time, his heart hammering against his ribs. This moment, confronting his family's killers, had played out in his dreams countless times. But now, with Lillian waiting for his return, revenge seemed less important than justice, than survival. They pushed through the batwing doors together, the sheriff's voice cutting through the saloon's noise. Hollister. Hands where I can see them. The 3 outlaws reacted with practiced speed. Hollister overturned the poker table for cover, while his companions drew their weapons. Patrons screamed, diving for safety as the first shots rang out. Daniel fired at the outlaw to Hollister's right, catching him in the shoulder. The man yelled in pain, his shot going wild. The sheriff engaged the 3rd outlaw, their exchange of gunfire deafening in the confined space. Through the chaos, Daniel found himself face to face with Hollister. The outlaw's eyes widened in recognition. You, he snarled, the kid from Fort Benton, thought we finished your family. You did, Daniel replied coldly, his gun trained on Hollister's chest. I'm here to finish you. Hollister laughed an ugly sound. You ain't got the stomach for it, boy. I seen your kind before, all talk. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. 1 shot, and his family's murder would be avenged. Justice for 6 years of nightmares and solitude. A crash from the back door announced the arrival of the deputies. Hollister, momentarily distracted, turned his head. Daniel had his clear shot, the killing shot he'd dreamed of. Lillian's face flashed in his mind. Not her smile or her laughter, but the grief in her eyes when she spoke of her brother's death, the emptiness of revenge, the hollowness of violence. Drop it, Hollister, Daniel said. It's over. The outlaw snarled, swinging his gun back toward Daniel. 2 shots rang out simultaneously, Daniel's catching Hollister in the shoulder, the outlaw's bullet grazing Daniel's temple as he ducked. Blood streaming down his face, Daniel struggled to keep his aim steady as Hollister staggered but remained standing. The outlaw raised his gun again, determination in his eyes. A 3rd shot echoed through the saloon. Hollister jerked, then collapsed, revealing Lillian in the doorway, a small derringer clutched in her shaking hands. Lillian, Daniel crossed the room in 3 strides, taking the gun from her trembling fingers. What are you doing here? Saving your life, apparently, she whispered, her eyes fixed on Hollister's motionless form. Is he? The sheriff knelt beside the outlaw, checking for a pulse. Alive, but won't be robbing any more banks. Good shot, miss. He looked up at Lillian with newfound respect. Where'd you learn to handle a derringer? My father taught me, her voice steadied. He said a woman alone in the West needed protection. Daniel pulled her against him, uncaring of the spectators or his bleeding temple. I told you to stay at the boarding house. And I decided that was a foolish request. She touched his wound gently. You're hurt. It's nothing, his arms tightened around her. You could have been killed. So could you, her eyes met his, fierce and unapologetic. I've lost too much to stand by while someone else I care for is in danger. The saloon buzzed with activity as the sheriff and deputies secured the wounded outlaws. Someone pressed a cloth to Daniel's temple, but he barely noticed, lost in Lillian's gaze. "Someone you care for," he repeated softly. A blush colored her cheeks, very much. The realization hit him with stunning force. His carefully constructed isolation, his belief that caring for others was a weakness, it had all been fear. Fear dressed as wisdom, loneliness masquerading as independence. "I need to tell you something," he said, leading her to a quiet corner as the doctor arrived to tend the wounded. "When I saw Hollister, all I wanted was revenge. It's what kept me going for 6 years. But when the moment came, when I could have killed him, I thought of you." Lillian's eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," Daniel took her hands in his. "I realized I didn't want more death. I wanted life, a future. With you, if you'll have me." "Daniel," her voice caught, "we've only known each other a few weeks. I know it's too soon, too fast, but the moment I saw you standing alone in that abandoned camp, something changed. I tried to fight it, to hold on to my solitude, but," he shook his head, searching for words, "you make me want to live again, not just survive." Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks. "I feel the same way. When Jacob died, I thought I had nothing left, but then you came, and suddenly there was hope again." Daniel brushed a tear from her face, his heart so full he could barely speak. "Come to my ranch, not as my wife, not yet. That can wait until we know each other better, but as my partner, we can build something together, Lillian, a home, a future." "Your ranch is quite a ways from town," she said, a glimmer of teasing in her eyes despite her tears. "Too far for propriety, you mean?" Daniel smiled. "Mrs. Peterson could act as chaperone until spring. She mentioned wanting to visit her sister in Silverdale. My cabin has 2 rooms, small but adequate." Lillian laughed, the sound warming him through. "You've thought this through, haven't you?" "For 2 weeks straight," he admitted, "though I never thought I'd have the courage to ask." She squeezed his hands. "Yes, Daniel Yates, I will come to your ranch. We'll build that future together." Spring came to the Montana Territory in a rush of melting snow and new growth. Daniel stood on the porch of his ranch house, no longer just a cabin, but a proper home expanded over the winter months, watching the sun rise over distant mountains. Behind him the door opened and Lillian stepped out, her golden hair loose around her shoulders, a cup of coffee in her hands. "You're up early," she said, offering him the cup. Daniel accepted it with a smile. "Wanted to check the north pasture. The new calves should start arriving any day now." Lillian leaned against the porch railing beside him, close enough that her shoulder touched his arm. 5 months had passed since she'd come to the ranch, 5 months of building and learning and growing together. Mrs. Peterson had stayed through the winter as promised, her cheerful presence easing the transition as Daniel and Lillian discovered each other's habits and histories. They'd taken their time, allowing their feelings to deepen naturally. Daniel had spoken at length about his family, about the guilt he carried for surviving when they had not. Lillian had shared her dreams for the future, her fears of more loss. Together, they'd worked the ranch through the harsh winter, finding rhythm and purpose in shared labor. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, setting down his coffee cup, "about what comes next." Lillian turned to him, the rising sun casting gold across her features. "Oh, Mrs. Peterson returns to town next week. Yes, her sister is expecting her." Daniel took her hands in his. "I know we agreed to wait, to be certain of our feelings before making permanent commitments." "We did," Lillian agreed, her eyes searching his face. "I'm certain, Lillian, more certain than I've ever been of anything." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small circle of gold, his mother's wedding ring, salvaged from the ashes of his family home. "I love you. I want to build a life with you, have a family with you, grow old with you on this land." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. "Are you asking me to marry you, Daniel Yates?" "I am." He dropped to one knee, holding the ring up to catch the morning light. "Lillian Summers, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, then again more firmly, "yes." Daniel slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms. Her kiss tasted of coffee and promise, of a future neither of them had dared imagine when they'd first met on that abandoned trail. Later, as they rode together across the awakening spring landscape of their ranch, Daniel marveled at the twist of fate that had brought Lillian into his life. Had the wagon train not abandoned her, had he not passed that camp at that precise moment, their paths would never have crossed. "What are you thinking about?" Lillian asked, guiding her mare alongside his gelding. How close I came to missing you, he replied honestly, if I'd been an hour later that day. Lillian reached across the space between them, her hand finding his. But you weren't. You found me when I needed you most. And you found me, Daniel said, the truth of it settling in his heart. I thought I was rescuing you, but really, you rescued me from a life half-lived. The golden band on her finger caught the sunlight as they rode toward home, their home, the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Montana sky. 3 months later, they were married in the Silverdale church, Mrs. Peterson beaming in the front pew like a proud mother. Sheriff Williams stood as Daniel's best man, a friendship forged in the aftermath of the saloon shootout. Vince Hollister and his surviving gang member had been transported to Helena for trial. Their long career of violence finally ended. Daniel had testified, finding unexpected closure in seeing justice served through law rather than personal vengeance. As Daniel and Lillian exchanged vows beneath a bower of spring wildflowers, the assembled townspeople bore witness to a love that had blossomed from the harshest of beginnings. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel kissed his bride with a heart fully healed, fully open to the love he'd once feared. That evening, as they danced at their wedding celebration in the town hall, Daniel held Lillian close, her head resting against his shoulder. Happy, he murmured into her hair. Lillian lifted her face to his, her green eyes radiant with joy. Completely, and you. More than I ever thought possible, he twirled her gently to the music. Remember what you told me during the blizzard, about your mother saying a life without connection isn't really living. I remember. She was right, Daniel smiled, his gaze taking in the community around them, friends and neighbors who had become like family over the past months as he'd gradually opened his life again. I spent 6 years existing, not living. You changed that, Lillian Yates. She smiled at the sound of her new name. We changed each other, and now we have the rest of our lives to live. Together. As they returned to the ranch that night, to the home they'd built, to the future they would create, Daniel knew with absolute certainty that the belief he'd held so long had been wrong. Caring for others wasn't weakness. It was the greatest strength a person could possess. Love didn't make the frontier more dangerous, it made its hardships bearable, its joys multiplied. The ranch house glowed with lamplight as they approached, no longer a solitary cabin, but a true home waiting to be filled with laughter and family. Daniel lifted his new wife from the wagon, carrying her across the threshold as was tradition. Welcome home, Mrs. Yates, he said, setting her gently on her feet in the front room they'd furnished together. Lillian's arms circled his neck, her eyes reflecting the golden lamplight. I've been home since the day you found me, Daniel. Home isn't a place, it's where you are. Outside, the Montana night spread its blanket of stars over the land they both loved, the land that had brought them together against all odds. Inside, two people who had once been lost found in each other the belonging they'd sought all along, a love strong enough to heal past wounds and brave enough to face whatever the frontier might bring.